Hello, my name is Mr. Trenikost, and this is my psychology video presentation. This is a video presentation about B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner's full name was Burrhus Frederick Skinner. He was born March 20th, 1904 in Susquehanna, Pennsylvania. He died on August 18th, 1990 in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the age of 86. Skinner was an American behaviorist, an author, an inventor, a baseball enthusiast, a poet, a social philosopher, and a psychologist. Most notably in this presentation, we will discuss his works as a psychologist. He is best known for his work with behavior analysis, radical behaviorism, verbal behavior, operant conditioning, and the operant conditioning chamber. It is this conditioning, operant, and the chamber that he designed to test it that we'll be discussing in this video. Before we move on to that, we're going to talk about two very important kinds of conditioning. Operant, which we just mentioned, and classical. Classical conditioning relies on a stimulus that is placed before a reflex-caused behavior occurs. Operant, in contrast, requires reinforcement or punishment to achieve the desired behavior. They both originated from different countries. Classical comes to us from Russia, while operant is made here in the United States. They are both the result of the works of a famous psychologist. Pavlov is the one who came up with this concept of classical psychology, while Skinner is known for his work with operant. They both rely on different types of conditioning. Classical uses respondent conditioning, while operant uses instrumental conditioning. They both require different kinds of behavior. Classical uses involuntary or reflex behaviors, while operant uses voluntary behaviors. How this behavior is enacted is used by different terminology. In classical, we say these actions are enacted, or elicted rather, while in operant conditioning, these behaviors are emitted. And they are both the result of very important psychological experiments. Classical conditioning is displayed in Pavlov's dog experiment, while operant is the result of Skinner's box experiment. Operant conditioning. This kind of conditioning is a form of psychological learning that involves the modification of occurrences and forms its own behaviors. It associates behavior with a certain stimulus. Depending on how the individual reacts, either a reward, positive reinforcement, or a punishment, negative reinforcement will be given. Operant conditioning chamber. This is also known as Skinner's box. The chamber is a laboratory apparatus that is used in the experimental analysis of behavior. It is also used to study animal behaviors. And it focuses on operant and classical conditioning. The purpose of Skinner's box. This chamber permits experimenters to study behavioral conditioning, or training. It teaches a subject animal to perform a certain action, like pressing a lever, in response to a specific stimulus, like light or sound. The subject, in the event that they perform the correct action, will be given a positive reinforcement. They will be delivered food or another reward. In some cases, if the subject does not do the desired response, they will be delivered a punishment. This is called negative reinforcement. Here is a diagram displaying the apparatus designed by Skinner. You will notice the subject, a mouse, in a cage. The cage has stimuli, meaning the speaker or the two different colored lights, the lever, which is the response, and the pellet dispenser for positive reinforcement. Below him is an electric grid, which will be used to deliver a slight shock in the case of a negative reinforcement, or, So, impact of Skinner's box. This was a very important experiment because it allowed for a lot of different things to be developed and studied in psychology. It allowed for us to explore the rate of response as a dependent variable and allowed for the appropriate scheduling of reinforcement for certain things. The chambers have been used in numerous fields and have become quite common. They are used in a variety of disciplines. In particular, behavioral pharmacology uses it. Its results are used to inform numerous disciplines outside of psychology. We are now going to take a look at some actual footage recorded during Skinner's experimentation.
Can pigeons read? This one gives every indication, because he's been taught to distinguish between two words and to behave appropriately. He's learned his different response to each sign by being rewarded with food. So the bird isn't acting independently. Its behavior is shaped by controlling its environment. The first task was to isolate an individual piece of behavior and see how that could be changed. Skinner did this by keeping individual pigeons at about 3/4 of their normal weight, so that the birds were always hungry, and food could be used as an automatic reward. The pigeon was studied in a uniform box, one it quickly grew used to. One piece of behavior, pecking a coloured disc, was measured on a graph. The pigeon learned that pecking the disc produced a reward. Then the behavior of pecking could be studied in relation to how often that reward was offered, or in Skinner's terms, what was the schedule of reinforcement.
The main thing is what we call schedules of reinforcement. Reinforcement is what the layman calls reward, and you can schedule it so that a reward occurs every now and then when a pigeon does something. We usually use a response with a pigeon pecking a little disc, a little spot on the wall, and you can reinforce with food, but you don't reinforce every time. Perhaps every 10th time, or perhaps only once every minute or something like that. There are a very large number of schedules, and they have their special effects. And there is a good example of how you can move from the pigeon to the human case, because one of the schedules which is very effective with rats or pigeons is what we call the variable ratio schedule, and that is at the heart of all gambling devices, and has the same effect. The pigeon can become a pathological gambler just as a person can. Now, the fact that we found that out with pigeons and could prove it by removing and changing the schedule makes it easy for us to interpret the case with the human subject. We don't say that the human subject gambles to punish himself, as the Freudians might say, or gambles because he feels excited when he does so. Nothing of the sort. People gamble because of the schedule of the reinforcement that follows, and this is true of all gambling systems. They all have variable ratios built into them. So what we've learned from the pigeon, it made it possible to interpret this vast field very effectively.
Where does that leave free will? Because we all think we have a choice whether to do things or not to do things.
Yes. Well, you see, it leaves it in the position of a fiction. We have assumed somehow or other that these internal states, feelings, and so on, have initiated something. They have started something. They have created. We have done something in a voluntary way. We have willed to act. If you now look at the actual history, we find that there are external reasons why this has happened. In other words, by discovering the causes of behavior, we can dispose of the imagined internal cause. We dispose of free will as an American divine of the 18th century, Jonathan Edwards, did. He said, we believe in free will because we know about our behavior, but not about its causes. And of course, it's the object of a science of behavior to discover causes. And once you have found those causes, there is less you need to attribute to an internal act or will, and eventually, I think, you need to attribute nothing to it.